Hey Chevra, what's happening? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we are studying Daf Mem Gimel, Daf 43 of Masechta Ayruvin. Daf Mem Gimel, talking about some interesting stuff. Enclosures outside of the Tchum Shabbos, alright, classic kind of Ayruvin-y kind of things. And then a boat like Rabban Gamliel, right? Remember Rabban Gamliel, we're talking about boats and can you walk within Dalet Amos and that kind of stuff. But then the Gemara gets into a question which on the surface of it seems pretty boring, but it actually kind of gets kind of interesting, which is, can you have a Tchum Shabbos above 10 Tfachim? Sounds like not so exciting, but it actually gets into a whole discussion about Moshiach and Eliyahu hanavi and the relationship between Eliyahu hanavi coming and Moshiach coming. And then as part of that, the question is, would Eliyahu hanavi travel on Shabbos above 10 Tfachim? I guess the assumption is, not if you're not allowed to. Alright. Chevra, let's begin. We're going to start on Daf Mem Beis Amud Beis, about 10 lines from the bottom of the page. Amr Rab, says Rab, Hilchsak Rabban Gamliel, Bedir V'Sar Usfinos. Says Rab that the halacha is like Rabban Gamliel when it comes to these enclosures, dir, visar, these different kinds of enclosures, or a boat, right? Meaning, Rabban Gamliel had said two things in the Mishnah. One was that if you have a fellow who is taken outside of the Tchum Shabbos by Gentiles, and then they put him in some kind of enclosed area. So Rabban Gamliel said that you're allowed to walk in that entire area. And Rabban Gamliel also said that if you're on a boat, and that boat has traveled beyond the Tchum Shabbos, you are nonetheless allowed to walk on the entire boat. You're not limited to 4 amas. So Rab says that the halacha is like Rabban Gamliel in both of those cases. Ushmuel Omar, hilchos Rabban Gamliel besfina, aval badir b'sar lo. Where Shmuel agrees with Rab when it comes to a boat, that the halacha is like Rabban Gamliel. However, he disagrees with Rav when it comes to dir v'sahar, these enclosed areas that this Yidula was brought to. He would paskin like Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Akiva that you would be limited to 4 amas in those enclosed areas. The Chuli Alma Mias, however, everyone agrees, halache Rabban Gamliel basfina, that everyone agrees that the halacha is like Rabban Gamliel in a boat. That if you're in a boat and the boat is traveling, even though it's beyond the Tchum Shabbos already, you are allowed to walk throughout the entire boat. My timer, how come everybody agrees that the halacha is like Rabban Gamliel when it comes to the boat? So Amar Rabba, Hol v'Shabbos b'av mechitzas mibod yom. So Rabba says, well, the reason is because when Shabbos began, he was already in the boat, and the boat has walls. So when Shabbos began, he was in an enclosed area. So therefore, you can walk in the entire area. Okay, fine. Whereas Reb Zera Amar, Horalusfinu notalto mitchilas arba manachto b'sof arba. That's very interesting. So Reb Zera says, well, because technically speaking, technically speaking, when you're on a moving boat, you're never actually walking 4 amos because the boat itself is moving, right? It's kind of like if you're on, let's say, almost like a treadmill, let's say, right? You're trying to walk, but you're not actually getting anywhere, right? The floor under you keeps on moving. So here also, when it comes to a boat, you're basically on this thing that keeps on moving, and therefore, as opposed to like when you're on dry land, where, you start at point A, and you walk over to point B, and you can see, is it 4 amas or not? But on the boat's always moving, and therefore every time you take a step, by the time you put down the next step, you're in a completely different, place of land. Not land. You're already in a, right? By the time you're already in a different Dalet Amos, right? You're never walking 4 amos, but every time you pick up one foot and put down the next, you're already in a different Dalet Amos. So therefore, says Reb Zera, that is why you'd be allowed to walk on this boat, even though it's outside of the Tchum Shabbos, because it's technically impossible to actually walk Dalet Amos from point A to point B, because by the time you put down your foot, you're already in a completely different Dalet Amos, because the thing keeps on moving. Alright. My benai, what's the nafkamina? Ike benai, so the Gemara gives 2 nafkaminas. Shenivchesu dofnei sfina. One could be if the walls of the sfina somehow disappeared. Well, if that's the case, then Rabban Gamliel, Rabba's whole argument that you're allowed to walk on the boat due to the fact that when Shabbos began, the walls were there. Well, if the walls are gone, then you can no longer walk on the whole boat. But according to Reb Zera, he's still got his theory about the boat keeping on moving. Inami kofet misfina l'sfina, or if you jump ship onto another boat. So in that case also, according to Rabbah, you're no longer in the same walls that you began Shabbos in. Whereas, according to Reb Zera, still it's going to be impossible to actually walk Daled Amis since the boat keeps on moving. Reb Zera my time lo Amar Rabbah. How come Reb Zera doesn't say like Rabbah, that since when Shabbos began you were in this enclosed boat, so therefore the whole thing is considered like Daled Amis? So Amar Lach, because Reb Zera will say to you, Mechitzes lavriach mayim asuyos, because the walls of a boat are really made to keep out the water, not to serve as significant walls in terms of being able to walk in that area when it is outside of the Tchum Shabbos. V'Rabbah, and Rabbah says, my time alo Amar Reb Zera. How come Rabbah doesn't hold like Reb Zera? So he says, well, because b'maleches kulam lo plige. Because, meaning, what's the Gemara that, not the Gemara, what's the question that Reb Zera is trying to answer? How come both Rab and Shmuel agree that the halacha is like Rabban Gamliel when it comes to the boat? So Reb Zera says, you know why both Rab and Shmuel agree that the halacha is like Rabban Gamliel by the boat, that you're allowed to walk an entire boat? It's because the boat is moving. And because the boat is moving, you're not actually walking more than 4 amos. Because every time you put down you pick up one leg and put down the next, the boat's in a completely different Daled Amos already. So Reb Zera explains that it's technically impossible to actually walk more than Daled Amos on this moving boat. So that is why both Rabbah and Shmuel agree that the halacha is like Rabban Gamliel, that you can walk an entire boat. But says Rabbah, that's not really explaining why Rav and Shmuel both agree that the halacha is like Rabban Gamliel, because technically speaking, if you're not actually ever walking more than 4 amos, Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Akiva would agree with that as well. In which case, Reb Zera, you're talking about a situation where there's actually no machlokas bichlal. So you wouldn't have to say that the halacha is like Rabban Gamliel. Technically speaking, the halacha is also like Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Akiva, because you're not actually ever walking more than Daled Amos. So again, top line on Mem Gimel Amud Aleph for Rabbah, my time lo Amar Reb Zera. How come Rabbah doesn't hold like Reb Zera? Because b'maleches kule amar lo plige. Because when the boat is moving, which is what Reb Zera is talking about, there's actually no machlokas between Rabban Gamliel on the one hand, and he's probably with also Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Akiva on the other hand. So ki plige b'sha'amda, the machlokas between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua / Rabbi Akiva is only once the boat has stopped moving. If it's outside of the Tchum Shabbos, then it stops moving. But as long as it's moving, there's no machlokas. And that's why Rabbah cannot explain it like Reb Zera, because Reb Zera's explanation really is only relevant when the boat is moving, but there's no machlokas when the boat is moving. Omer Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak hat gesagt, Masnisen nami deka, that you can also imply this from our Mishnah, you can infer this from our Mishnah, that when the boat is moving, there's no machlokas bichlal between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua / Rabbi Akiva. Mimai, where do we see this in our Mishnah? Midiktani, when the fact that our Mishnah says, Ma'isa shabo mi palandarsin, that one time they were coming back from Palandarsim, v'fligas finasam vayam, and the boat went out into the middle of the sea, outside of Tchum Shabbos. Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, halchu eskula. Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah felt comfortable walking throughout the entire boat, whereas Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Akiva, what did they do? Lo zazu mi arba amis sherotu la'achmir al atzman. Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Akiva, they did not walk more than 4 amis. Why? They wanted to be machmir on themselves. Yomad bishlam b'ma'aleches lo plige hanu d'tani ratzu. And therefore, it makes sense, if what we're saying is correct, that everyone agrees, Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Akiva, everyone agrees that as long as the boat is moving, so then you'd be allowed to walk throughout the entire boat. That is why the Mishnah says that Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Akiva didn't want to walk more than 4 amas. They wanted to be machmir on themselves. But theoretically, they would have no problem with walking in the entire boat, because as long as it's moving, everyone would agree that it's acceptable to walk throughout the entire boat. Dilma Amda, because they were concerned that what would happen if the boat suddenly stops, and then they're going to walk more than Daled Amis outside of the Tchum Shabbos, so therefore they wanted to be machmir themselves. Eliyahu Amar Plige, but if you say that Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Akiva argue even when the boat is moving, well then Hayratzu lahachmir Isurahu. What do you mean that they just wanted to be machmir on themselves? What do you mean they wanted to be machmir? According to them, if they argue when the boat is moving as well, they didn't just want to be machmir, they felt that it would be usher to leave the 4 amas. So from the fact that we see that they were just saying, look, we don't want to leave the Daled Amas because we want to be machmir on ourselves, clearly they feel that me'ikar adin, you would be able to walk throughout the entire boat as long as it's moving, and there's no machlokas when it's moving. The machlokas is only when the boat is stationary. Because at that point, you have already gone outside of Tchum Shabbos, and and at that point you won't be able to walk more than Daled Amis, at least according to Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Akiva. Omer Rav Ashi, said Rav Ashi, Masnisa Nami Deka, you can also infer this from our Mishnah, Diktani Sfino Dumya Dedir V'Sahar, because we're comparing, right? The first case in the Mishnah talks about these enclosed areas when the Goyim took out this Yidala outside of the Tchum Shabbos and brought him to some enclosed area. And then we start talking about a boat that's in the middle of the sea. Madir v'sar dekviya afsfina nami dekviya. Well, just like these enclosed areas that the Goyim brought the Yidala to is a fixed place, a stationary place. Well, also the boat is, when they argue, when there's this machlokas, it's going to be when the boat is stationary, not when the boat is moving. Omer Rav Acha b'derava l'Rav Ashi. Said Rav Acha b'derava to Rav Ashi, Hilchasa Rabbi Gamliel b'sfina, that the halacha is like Rabbi Gamliel when it comes to a boat. Hilchasa mechlal de plige. 1 second. If you're saying that the halacha is like Rabbi Gamliel, does that imply that there's actually an argument about this? In Ve'atanya, yes, there is an argument, because we learn in a Brisa, Hananya says Hananya, Omer, Kol Oso Ayom, that entire Shabbos, Yashvu V'danu B'dvar halacha, that they were talking about, Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Akiva, everybody was talking about that halacha. Emesh, and then yesterday, Echriya Achi Abba, my father's brother. Now, this Hananya's father's brother was Rabbi Yoshua, and they decided halacha Rabbi Gamliel basfina, that the halacha is like Rabbi Gamliel when it comes to the boat, and the halacha Rabbi Akiva b'dir v'sar, that the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva when it comes to these enclosed areas. And so we see that there is a machlokas when it comes to the boat, and that would be when the boat is stationary. But when the boat is moving, everyone agrees that you, at least me'ikar adin, would be allowed to walk throughout the boat, because you're not actually walking 4 amos, because the boat keeps on moving and is not actually stationary. By Rav Hananya asks a kasha, Yesh tchum in the ma'ala me'asara, or ein tchum in the ma'ala me'asara? Is there tchum Shabbos above 10 tfachim? Okay, interesting question. Amur gavoa asar v'rachav arba lo tibailach. Do not ask about a beam that is 10 tfachim tall and 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide. Meaning, if you, let's say, at the end of the Tchum Shabbos, there's some big platform, and part of it is within the Tchum Shabbos, part of it is outside of the Tchum Shabbos, and it's 10 tfachim tall and at least 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide. So certainly you're not going to be able to walk past the Tchum Shabbos on this platform. Daras michti, because it's just considered like, uneven land, but, just like you wouldn't be allowed to walk past the Tchum Shabbos on the land, you also wouldn't be able to walk past the Tchum Shabbos on this platform. Kiti bailach, where you should ask is ba'amud gavo asar ve'eno rachav arba. Okay, if you have a beam that is 10 tfachim tall but is not 4 by 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide, inami, or else the cause of the kfitza. Okay, I guess he's jumping from like platform to platform, and I guess he's above 10 tfachim the whole time. Okay, lishnach, otherwise another way to explain this is bisfina, or in a boat, because the boat, travels above 10 tfachim from the ground. So what's the halacha? Is there tchum above 10 tfachim or not? Amr of Hoshaya, says of Hoshaya, Tashma, come in here. Ma'aseh sheba'u min Palandarsin, that there was this story where they were coming from this place called Palandarsin, v'fliga sfinasum bayam v'chulei, and their boat was in the middle of the sea, and they were trying to figure out, can you walk Daled Amas or not? So Iyamad b'shlama yesh tchumen, mishum hachi ratzum. So I understand, if we say that there is tchum above 10 tfachim, that is why Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Akiva wanted to be machmer on themselves, so that just in case the boat stops suddenly, they will not accidentally walk more than Daled Amas and be in violation of Tchum Shabbos, even though it's above 10 tfachim from the ground. So Elai Amar Ein Tchumen Amai Ratzu. But if you say that there is no Tchum Shabbos above 10 tfachim, well then what's their concern? Why did Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yoshua want to be machmer on themselves to not go Daled Amas? Who cares? There's no Tchum above 10 tfachim. So rather it would make sense to say that there is tchum above 10 tfachim, and that's why Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yeshua were concerned that just in case the boat stops suddenly, they didn't want to be walking more than Daled Amas. So the Gemara answers, actually, maybe there is no tchum Shabbos above 10 tfachim. Okay, well then, what were Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Akiva concerned about? Rather, Kida Amar, Rava b'maleches b'rekek, hachanami b'maleches b'rekek. You could say that it's talking about, if the boat was like in like kind of muddy thing that was within 10 tfachim, that would be where Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yeshua were concerned about. But if it wasn't in that muddy area, then maybe you can argue that they wouldn't be concerned. So it's not definitive to argue that there is tchum above 10 tfachim. Fine. Tashma, come in here, Pam Achas, Lo Nichnesu L'Namal, Ad Shechashecha V'chulei. The Mishnah had said that one time they only pulled up into the port after Shabbos already began, and the students wanted to figure out, do they have to be concerned about Tchum Shabbos or not? Well, Iyamad B'Shlama Yesh Tchumen. I understand if we say that there is Tchum Shabbos above 10 Tfachim, right? And they were in the boat, which was above 10 Tfachim, and they were concerned about Tchum Shabbos Shapir. It makes sense. Eliyamad Ein Tchumen. But if you say that there is no Tchum above 10 Tfachim, well then, Kilo Ayinu B'Soch Atchum, my have. Who cares if they weren't within the Tchum? There is no Tchum in the boat. So again, you give the same answer that you can be talking about if they're in this kind of muddy waters where it's low down, it's within 10 tfachim. Fine. Tashma, come in here. Hanishev Shmaitza, the Amrinon, the Isamron, B'Tzafa, B'Shabbat, coming to Avchizda, B'Sura. Apparently it's a Gemara in Chulin that there were these 7 halachis regarding Chulin that were taught on a certain Shabbos morning to Rav Chizda in Surah. Very interesting. I guess Rav Chizda was a Surah man. Uvadei Pani de Shabbat, and then Shabbos evening it was taught Kami de Rabba b'Pumpedisa. It says here Rava, but other Gersos changed it to Rabba because Rava was in Mechoza. I think he did Lamaisa spend the shtickle time in Pumpedisa. We saw, I think, a Gemara Shabbos somewhere where Rava was on his way to Pumpedisa. Does anybody remember what that was talking about? Why was Rava in Pumpedisa? I remember Lamaisa was like actually kind of interesting. Yeah, I think Lamaisa was kind of interesting. These people I work with, they're very heimish, they're very geschmack. So they have a whole shtickle Torah about Rava and his wife. He was married to the daughters of Rav Chizda. So we thought maybe we could have a shtickle taich from the fact that Rava was going to Pumpedisa. I don't remember Lamaisa. I don't remember. Anyways, but yeah, so there's a gear that changed it to Rabba because Rabba was certainly in Pumpedisa. So, right, so, and then he was by Rabba in Pumpedisa. So apparently there was some halacha that was taught some Shabbos morning in Surah, and that Shabbos evening it was already taught in Pumpedisa. Now, the distance between Surah and Pumpedisa is more than the Tchum Shabbos. So, Mana Minu. Now, who said this teaching in Surah on Shabbos morning and in Pumpedisa on Shabbos evening? Lav Eliyahu Amrinu. Some was Eliyahu hanavi, who was saying these 7 halachis, and alma in tchum l'ma'ala me'asar. And therefore it must be that there's no Tchum Shabbos above 10 Tfachim, because if there is Tchum Shabbos above 10 Tfachim, well then, I guess we're assuming that Eliyahu hanavi was like flying there or something, and if there's Tchum Shabbos above 10 Tfachim, well then he wouldn't be flying between these places. So it must be that there's no Tchum Shabbos above 10 Tfachim. So, Dilma, Dilma, Yosef Sheda Aminu. Maybe it wasn't Eliyahu hanavi, maybe it was Yosef the demon, and he isn't so makbid on Hilchos Shabbos. So therefore maybe he traveled from Surah to Pumbedisa, and even though it was beyond the Tchum Shabbos, but maybe Eliyahu hanavi wouldn't have traveled because maybe there is Tchum above 10 Tfachim. Alright, Seder. Fine, still not definitive. Tashma, come in here. Harini Nazir b'yom sheben David ba. Interesting. You have a fellow, and he says, on the day that Moshiach comes, I'm going to be a Nazir. Well, here's the thing. We don't know when Moshiach is going to come. So, mutar lishtos yain b'shabbosos u'v'yom tovim. So, nonetheless, he's allowed to drink wine on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So, he can't drink wine any of the other days of the week, because maybe Moshiach will come that day. And or really technically maybe Moshiach came that day, and he's a Nazir, so he can't drink wine any day of the week, but on Shabbos and Yom Tov he can drink wine. Right, so he's allowed to drink wine on Shabbos and Yom Tov, but not during the week. So if you say that there is Tchum Shabbos above 10 Tfachim, so well, that's why he would be allowed to drink wine on Shabbos and Yom Tov, because Eliyahu hanavi, and the assumption is if Eliyahu hanavi is not going to come on Shabbos, then Moshiach also won't come on Shabbos. So it makes sense to say, how come he's allowed to drink wine on Shabbos? Because he knows that Eliyahu hanavi is not going to come on Shabbos. How come? It's because there is Tchum Shabbos above 10 Tfachim, and therefore Eliyahu hanavi will not travel above the 10 Tfachim on Shabbos. Okay? So again, for the top line of Mem Gimel Beis, Yamad B'Shlama Yesh Tchumin. I understand if you say that there is Tchum above 10 Tfachim, Hanu B'Shabbasus Yom Tov Mutter. That's why he's allowed to drink wine on Shabbos and Yom Tov, because Eliyahu hanavi is not going to violate the Tchum Shabbos, which is above 10 Tfachim, in order to come. But if you say that there is no concept of Tchum Shabbos above 10 Tfachim, well then, why is he allowed to drink wine on Shabbos? Maybe Eliyahu hanavi is going to come. And the assumption is, I guess, if Eliyahu hanavi is going to come, then Moshiach can also come. So the Gemara answers, shiny awesome, that actually it's different when it comes to Moshiach and stuff. Because the Amar Kah, the pasuk says, Hine anochi sholeach lochem es Eliyahu hanavi v'gomer, it says, Lefnei ba yom Hashem. That basically, the Eibishter is going to give you 24 hours notice. The Eibishter is going to send Eliyahu hanavi the day before he sends Moshiach. And therefore, you basically have 24 hours notice. So you can drink wine on, he could drink wine on Shabbos, because, if Eliyahu hanavi didn't come yet, well then, Moshiach isn't going to come that day. So when he finds, so if he hears on Shabbos that Eliyahu hanavi came, so then he knows tomorrow Moshiach is going to come. But if he hasn't heard anything, so he's allowed to drink wine. So, lo as Eliyahu mi esmo, right? And Eliyahu hanavi didn't come on Friday, so he knows that he could drink wine. He gets like a 24-hour notice. Yachi b'chol kol yom v'yoma nami l'shtri dalo as Eliyahu mi esmo. Well, if that's the case, that you have 24 hours notice, i.e., Eliyahu hanavi is going to come 24 hours before Mashiach, well then, this Nazir, or this person who made this neder that will be a Nazir on the day that Mashiach comes, he should be able to drink wine every day of the week, because, as long as Eliyahu hanavi didn't come the day before, well then, Mashiach isn't going to come today, because Eliyahu hanavi needs to come needs to come first. Selamrin levezden agadol also. So the reason why this fellow is going to be not allowed to drink wine during the week is because we're concerned that, well, maybe Eliyahu hanavi did come yesterday, But he went straight to the Bezdin Agadol, and he's hanging out there, drinking coffee. But he's already here. You just don't know that he's here. And today, Moshiach is going to come. Well, hanavi leima lebezdin Agadol also. Well, if that's the case, then why don't we say the same thing about Shabbos as well? Maybe Eliyahu hanavi came yesterday on Friday, he's drinking coffee in the Bezdin Agadol. And then today, that's why you didn't know that he came. But today on Shabbos, Moshiach is going to come. So, why is he allowed to drink wine on Shabbos? So the Gemara answers, well, kvar muvtach lo in Yisrael, it's guaranteed to the Yidden she'ein Eliyahu ba lo ba'arbe Shabbosos v'lo ba'arbe Yom Tov m'pnei HaTorah. Well, because Eliyahu hanavi is not going to come on Erev Shabbos or on Erev Yom Tov because everyone is so busy putting things together that if they find out that Eliyahu hanavi came, somehow there was a leak from Bezdin that he's there drinking coffee, so then everyone's going to drop what they're doing to go greet Eliyahu hanavi, but they have to get ready for Shabbos. So that's going to be a problem. So therefore, Eliyahu hanavi will not come on Erev Shabbos or Erev Yom Tov. And therefore, if Moshiach didn't come on Friday, well then he's definitely not going to come on Shabbos, because in order for him to come on Shabbos, that means that Eliyahu hanavi would have had to come the day before on Friday, but he doesn't come on Friday. So that's why you're allowed to, that's why this fellow would be allowed to drink wine on Shabbos, because he knows that Moshiach is not going to come. Okay, fine. Now, we're assuming that, well, if Eliyahu hanavi doesn't come on Friday, because if he comes and everybody will drop what they're doing in order to greet him, and they won't get ready for Shabbos, well then Mistama also, Moshiach won't come on Friday, because for the same reason, that if he comes on Friday, everyone's going to stop what they're doing, they won't get ready for Shabbos. So, well, if that's the case, well then let this fellow drink wine on Friday as well, because, Moshiach isn't going to come on Friday. So Moshiach, where am I? So Eliyahu lo asi Moshiach nami lo asi b'mailei Shabbos l'ishtri. So Eliyahu lo asi Moshiach asi. So my answer is no. Eliyahu hanavi will not come on a Friday. However, Moshiach can come on a Friday. How come? They came to asi Mashiach hakol avadim hein liYisrael. Well, because once Moshiach comes, well then everybody's going to be servants in servitude to the Jews, and when we have servants, we won't really have to worry so much about getting ready for Shabbos. Our servants will do it for us, and therefore, if Moshiach comes on a Friday, then we can drop what we're doing to greet Moshiach, because our servants will prepare Shabbos for us. Okay, sounds nice. Alright. I wonder how that fits into to Shmuel's opinion about that there's no difference between Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba except for Shibud Malchios. Does that apply here? Hakoponim. Fine, so Moshiach can come on Friday, and that's why this fellow would be unable to drink wine on Friday. Bechad b'Shaba Lishtri. Now here is the tie-in to Tchum Shabbos being above 10 Tfachim. Now, theoretically, this fellow, our friend over here, should be allowed to drink wine on Sunday. Right? Because if you say that there's an issue of Tchum Shabbos above 10 Tfachim, so then Eliyahu hanavi would not come on Shabbos either, because there's Tchum issues. And if Eliyahu hanavi doesn't come on Shabbos, well, the Moshiach is not going to come on Sunday, and our friend should be able to drink wine on Sunday. So Liv Shot Minab, from the fact that we say that he's not allowed to drink wine on Sunday, well then let us assume the Ein Tchumin, that there is no Tchum Shabbos above 10 Tfachim, and therefore Eliyahu hanavi would be able to come on Shabbos, and that's why our friend cannot drink wine on Sunday either. The Yesh Tchumin B'chad B'Shaba Lishtri, because if there is Tchumin, right, the Yesh Tchumin, if there is Tchum above 10 Tfachim, well then we know that Eliyahu hanavi wouldn't come on Shabbos because of Tchum issues. So B'chad B'Shaba Lishtri, so our friend should be able to drink wine on Sunday. D'lo Eliyahu B'Shabbos. So the Gemara answers, Haitana Sapukim Asapkale, Yesh Tchumin, or Ein Tchumin, U'Lechumra. So the Gemara answers, no, you cannot prove either way if there is tchum above 10 tefachim, because our Tana is actually our Tana who's talking about this guy who made the neder that he's going to be a Nazir when Moshiach comes. So he actually is not clear about if there's Tchum Shabbos above 10 Tfachim or not, and therefore, he's being machmir, he's being strict and saying, look, don't drink wine on Sunday, because just in case there's no Tchum Shabbos above 10 Tfachim, maybe Eliyahu can come on Shabbos. So, okay, but it's not definitive. Dekai ema is the kanadar. Now, when is this fellow making a neder? Ilema dekai b'chol. If he's making the neder during the week, and we're saying that, every day of the week he's not able to drink wine because maybe Eliyahu Hanavi came that day. Well, let's say it's, Thursday, well, not Eliyahu Hanavi, but, Moshiach. Well, let's say it's Thursday or whatever, and he makes this neder, and we're concerned, well, maybe Moshiach came today. So therefore, you're already a Nazir. We have to be concerned you're already a Nazir. Well, if we're already concerned that he's a Nazir on Thursday, well, it's not going, is being a Nazir is not going away by Shabbos. So why all of a sudden on Shabbos would he be allowed to drink wine if he's already a Nazir from Thursday? Or we have to be concerned about that. Once already he's a Nazir, right, during the week, based on his the fact that Moshiach may have already come, well, then why all of a sudden on Shabbos would he be allowed to drink wine? Why is Shabbos going to come and undo his Nazir, the fact that he's theoretically a Nazir? So Ela Dekai b'Shabbata, rather it's talking about where it is Shabbos v'kanadar, v'yom tov v'kanadar. Rather, no, our friend was making a neder on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, and therefore v'hu yoma hu d'sharilei mikan ve'elech asrei. And on that day, if he makes this stipulation that when Mashiach comes, he's going to become a Nazir. So if it's Shabbos, then when he makes that neder, well, we know that Mashiach isn't going to come on Shabbos because Eliyahu Hanavi would not have come the day before on Friday. Okay, so that Shabbos he would be allowed to get his last tastes of wine for at least 30 days. All right. So now continues, right? So the Gemara continues with another piece from the Mishnah. Pamachas leinichnasu l'nam v'chulei. One time they didn't make it back to the port before Shabbos, and the students were asking Rabbi Gamliel about if they could walk on the boat. Fine. Well, if they can get off the boat, if they have been concerned about Tchum Shabbos. Tanish Foferes Ha'ilol Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel had a certain reed, a certain hollow reed that he would use almost like a some kind of a looking glass. And looking through this reed, he was able to see exactly 2,000 amas away in the sea, on the dry land. Now somebody who needs to know how deep a valley is, so he could take this reed and he can see how far it goes down, see if it's 2,000 amas. Then he'll know how deep the valley is. If a person wants to know how tall a certain palm tree is, moded komaso v'tzilo, so he somehow measures the height of the with this looking glass, with this reed, he can somehow see what the height of the tree is and its shade, and compare that b'tzel komaso, and then he compares that to his own height and shade, and kind of compares his own height versus the shade and gets the proportion. Then he can kind of figure out the proportions of the tree as well. V'yeda kamagova shel dekel, know how tall the palm tree is. Harotza shelo tishre chaya ra b'tzel kever. What if you don't want, so if you have a person who was buried recently, and there's a tombstone above the grave, and you don't want that animals are going to be hanging out by that grave and then smell the fresh body and dig it up and eat it. You don't want that. So what you can do is you can make sure that this tombstone is not giving any shade, because the animals would be attracted to the shade from it's sunny out and they want shade. But if you make sure that the tombstone is not it doesn't provide any shade, well, then the animals won't be interested in hanging out there. So what you do is it's kana b'daled shows bayom. So 4 hours into the day, when you can get the best shade, when it's hot out and the animals are going to want to find some shade, and there is shade. So what you do is you put out a reed, you put out some kind of a pole at 4 hours into the day, and see in which direction the shade goes. And then mashpia v'ola, mashpia v'yored. And then you create some kind of like a slant, so that, basically make sure that you don't have like a 90-degree angle that will give nice shade for the animals. Basically look in which direction the sun is and see where the shade is, which direction the shade goes in, and then basically use that information to make sure that this monument that you're putting up doesn't give any shade for these animals, so that they won't hang out there and then they won't dig up the grave. Nehemiah, brother of Chanilai, Nehemiah, the son of Rav Chanilai, Meshachte Shmaita, he was very engrossed in his learning. V'nafak chutz l'tchum, and he was walking and thinking, and the next thing he knew, he was outside of the Tchum Shabbos, and he was basically stuck. Amalei Rav Chisda Rav Nachman. So Rav Chisda says to Rav Nachman, Nehemiah Talmidach Shari B'tzar, your student Nehemiah is stuck in a very uncomfortable situation. He accidentally left the Tchum Shabbos, and now he can't move. So Amalei, so listen to what Rav Nachman said it. It's extremely interesting. Aselu mechitza shel bnei adam v'yikanes. Excuse me. So Rav Nachman said, well, what you can do is you can make a wall of people. You just get people who, I guess, who would be acceptable for them to go to where this Nehemiah, brother of Chanilai, is. It's still, get people, he is still within their Tchum Shabbos, and have them surround him and basically create a human wall around him. And then v'yikanes, and he can get back into the city now. He's like in a closed area. He can get back into the city by way of this human wall. Super interesting. Yosef Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak achor de Rava, Yosef Rava kamed de Rav Nachman. So now Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak was sitting behind Rava, and Rava was sitting before Rav Nachman. Amalei Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak le Rava, and Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said to Rava, Maika mibaya leile Rav Chisda. What exactly was Rav Chisda's question? Right? Meaning, this Nehemiah, the Rav Chanilai, was stuck outside. Rav Chisda says to Rav Nachman, hey, Nehemiah's stuck, what do we do? So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak wants to know, what exactly was Rav Chisda uncertain about? If we're talking about where there's enough people to mamish create walls so that he can get all the way back into the city. And he's trying to, and Rav Chisda wasn't sure, do we pass on the Rabban Gamliel, who says that, in the case where the Gentiles took out the Yid against his will from the Tchum Shabbos, and now they put him in some other enclosed area, even though he didn't start Shabbos in this enclosed area, nonetheless, he could still walk in it. So here also, obviously Nehemiah, brother of Chanilai, did not start out Shabbos in this human wall, but the human wall is being constructed around him, so can he use it? So Gamliel Mistam would say yes, and Rav Chisda wasn't sure, do we pass on the Gamliel or not? O Dilma b'dilo malu gavri askinan. Or maybe what it's talking about is there weren't actually enough people to create walls, a human wall that would get him all the way into the city. Rather, they got him most of the way, but there was still a 2 amma gap between where their human wall ended and then to get back into the, well, not necessarily the city, but the Tchum Shabbos. So we want to know, is the halacha like Rabbi Eliezer or not? I guess Rabbi Eliezer says that in that case, you would be able to take the plunge for those 2 amas and get back into the Tchum Shabbos once the human wall ends. So says Rava to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Pshita b'delo malu gavre askinan. Obviously, we're talking about where right there, Rav Chisda wasn't sure about, in the situation where there were not enough people to get all the way back into the Tchum Shabbos, and there was like a 2 amma gap between the people and the Tchum Shabbos. Because if it enters your mind that we're talking about where there were enough people to get all the way back into the Tchum Shabbos, well then what's Rav Chisda's question? Rav already said that the halacha is like Gamliel when it comes to deer and sar and svina. And this is essentially, right, meaning in deer and sar is a situation where when Shabbos started, you were not in this enclosed area, but now you are. So Rav said that the halacha is like Rabbi Gamliel when it comes to dir v'sar, which would be the equivalent of this human wall, and therefore, of course, it would work. So rather, it must be that we were talking about where there were not enough people to get all the way into the city, into the Tchum Shabbos. And Rav Chizda was trying to figure out, is the halacha like Rabbi Eliezer or not? Would he be able to, walk those missing 2 amos to get back into the Tchum Shabbos? Dekanami, you can also infer this, that Rav Nachman says that, what did Rav Nachman say? So he said, and let him go in. Ma yikanes, what does it mean to go in? La b'delo mechitza. It means go in even though there's no mechitza over there. So that's what it's talking about. Alright, Chebe, that was Daf Mem Gimel of Masechta Ayruvin. What did we talk about? We talked about enclosures outside of the Tchum Shabbos, right? That Rav says that these enclosures, as well as a boat, we pass like Rabbi Gamliel, whereas Shmuel said that when it comes to these enclosures, we pass like Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Akiva, but a boat we pass like Rabbi Gamliel. But both Rav and Shmuel agree that by the boat we pass like Rabbi Gamliel. The question is why? So Rabbah says the reason is because since you started Shabbos surrounded by those walls in the boat, so then you'd be able to walk in the entire thing. Whereas Reb Zera says, well, since the boat is always moving, well, you're never actually going to be walking Dalet Amos. You're, by the time you pick up one leg and put down the other one, the boat's already in a different Dalet Amos. Fine. And then we got into the question about, is there Tchum Shabbos above 10 Tfachim? Now, we didn't really give a definitive answer, but we spent a lot of time trying to figure that out based on whether or not Eliyahu hanavi would travel above 10 Tfachim on Shabbos. And we couldn't really figure it out, but we saw some interesting things about Eliyahu hanavi, that he doesn't come on Erev Shabbos or Erev Yom Tiv, and that he comes 24 hours before Moshiach comes. Very, very interesting stuff. Chevra, I hope you enjoyed Daf Mem Gimel. Have an awesome day. Peace.